For more than 40 years, the murder of 16-year-old Sherry Jo Elliott remained a mystery. Her family knew the person responsible had once lived somewhere among ordinary people, hiding behind an ordinary face. Investigators had evidence, thousands of tips, and the determination to keep searching, but they did not have a name. Then modern DNA technology reopened a path that had seemed permanently closed. The answer would reveal how a suspected killer stayed hidden for decades, and why solving a cold case can bring truth without bringing back everything that was lost. Sherry lived near Flint, Michigan, and was remembered as a quiet, careful, and loving teenager. Her mother, Joyce, recalled a little girl who could sit for hours with a coloring book. Relatives remembered her as respectful, affectionate, and deeply loved. As a teenager, she liked looking neat, matching her clothes, doing her nails, and watching her favorite television program after school. She was also cautious around strangers. Her family later emphasized that she would not normally approach an unfamiliar vehicle, much less willingly accept a ride from someone she did not know. On a cold morning in November 1983, Sherry left home to walk roughly 2 blocks to her school bus stop. Before leaving, her mother reminded her to dress warmly. Sherry said goodbye, and the adults left for work expecting another normal day. But Sherry never reached the bus. When she failed to return home that afternoon, her family immediately sensed that something was wrong. Nothing suggested that she had planned to leave. Her belongings were still at home, and disappearing without telling anyone was completely unlike her. The first police report treated Sherry as a possible runaway, a response her family strongly rejected. As the hours passed, they called relatives and friends, distributed flyers, searched streets, alleys, and dumpsters, and appealed to the public. Her mother could barely eat. Everywhere the family looked, every unknown man and every passing vehicle raised the same terrifying question: was this the person who had taken Sherry? The case reached local news, and a reward was announced, but the searches brought no sign of her. About a week later, on November 20th, a trapper checking his route discovered Sherry in a roadside drainage ditch in Saginaw County, north of Flint. The location suggested that her attacker had not carefully concealed her, but had simply left her beside the road. Investigators found a small and difficult crime scene with very little physical evidence. Sherry had been shot 4 times, including once in the back of the head. The circumstances also indicated that she had been sexually assaulted. The medical findings suggested she may have remained alive for some time after she was abandoned. For Sherry's family, the discovery ended the search but began a different kind of suffering. A detective arrived with a necklace she had worn and delivered the news no parent should ever hear. Her stepfather identified her. Then the family had to arrange a funeral while wondering whether the killer might be watching. They studied unfamiliar faces among the mourners because they had heard that some offenders returned to observe the grief they caused. No suspicious visitor produced an answer, and the family was left with unbearable questions. Investigators had preserved Sherry's clothing, fingernail samples, and material from the sexual assault examination. That decision would become crucial decades later. In 1983, however, DNA analysis could not do what it can today. The evidence could be stored, but it could not yet identify an unknown person through distant relatives. Detectives instead depended on interviews, vehicle records, eyewitness claims, and conventional forensic comparisons. Flint was then strongly connected to the automobile industry, and Sherry's death shocked the community. Tips poured in by the thousands. One account placed her near a white van. Another claimed she entered a yellow Camaro. Police compiled huge lists of vehicles and followed leads one by one, without modern databases or digital search tools. The Camaro claim ultimately appeared to be false, but it consumed valuable time and sent both investigators and relatives chasing vehicles across the area. As in many homicide investigations, police examined the people closest to the victim. Sherry's stepfather, Robert Schultz, was the last family member known to have seen her alive. Investigators questioned him repeatedly, examined perceived inconsistencies, requested a polygraph, obtained his DNA, and even arranged a recorded telephone call with Joyce. Nothing connected him to the crime. Yet suspicion followed him and deepened the family's pain. Joyce not only mourned her daughter, she also watched the man she trusted live beneath the shadow of an accusation he denied. Over the years, detectives interviewed hundreds of people and collected DNA from more than 100 individuals. None matched the unknown male profile recovered from the evidence. Leads gradually disappeared, boxes of reports accumulated, and the investigation went cold. The silence affected the entire family. They lived with nightmares, fear, and the feeling that the truth might never arrive. Sherry's absence remained present in birthdays, family gatherings, and every future milestone she was denied. In 2002, a Michigan State Police Violent Crime Task Force took another look. Detectives revisited the white van, the yellow Camaro, earlier witnesses, and the suspicions involving Sherry's stepfather. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the National Law Enforcement Database, but there was no hit. The result established that the DNA belonged to an unknown man, yet the database could identify him only if his profile, or a qualifying match, was already present. The killer may simply never have entered the system. 2 decades later, an unexpected lead renewed interest. In 2022, authorities learned that a former neighbor connected to the original investigation had lived for years under a false identity and had left Michigan after the murder. Police obtained his DNA. It did not match. Even so, the episode convinced Detective Sergeant William Arndt that the case deserved a complete modern review. The scale of that task was enormous. Tens of thousands of pages produced by roughly 20 earlier investigators. Michigan State Police partnered with Western Michigan University, where vetted students helped organize and digitize the files. Converting decades of paper into searchable information allowed investigators to separate useful evidence from repeated or disproven leads. The old case was no longer just a stack of boxes. It became an investigation that modern tools could analyze. In 2025, preserved biological evidence was sent to Athram, a forensic DNA laboratory. Specialists evaluated its age, condition, quantity, and possible mixture of contributors. Although more than 40 years had passed, they concluded that the sample could support advanced testing. Using forensic genome sequencing, the laboratory built a profile containing hundreds of thousands of genetic markers, far more information than the older CODIS profile could provide. Those markers did not instantly display the killer's name. Instead, forensic genetic genealogy revealed biological relatives. Researchers constructed family trees while investigators checked ages, locations, histories, and connections to Michigan. One promising family line led to a woman in Wichita, Kansas, but it also created a daunting problem. She had 79 grandchildren. Investigators traveled to Kansas and obtained voluntary DNA samples from her and her son. Those results helped eliminate branches and narrow the search. After months of genealogical research and traditional police work, one candidate fit both the DNA relationships and the known facts: Ronnie Collins. He was 75 in 2025 and would have been in his early 30s when Sherry disappeared. He had lived in the relevant area. He had played in a band and reportedly used a white van to transport musicians and equipment, an unsettling connection to one of the earliest tips. Detective Arndt contacted Collins and arranged an interview for early January 2026. At that stage, investigators wanted to speak with him. They were not planning an immediate arrest. Collins postponed contact over the holidays and then failed to appear. When police later obtained a warrant for his DNA and went to his home, his wife told them that Collins had died by suicide on the day the interview was supposed to take place. His death prevented investigators from questioning him about Sherry, the circumstances of her abduction, or whether anyone else had been involved. But it did not prevent a scientific comparison. DNA collected after his death was tested against the preserved crime scene profile. Authorities reported a conclusive match establishing that Collins was the source of the male DNA from the sexual assault. Investigators therefore identified him as the perpetrator and believed the evidence also tied him to Sherry's murder, although he died before he could be prosecuted or tried in court. To people who knew Collins, the allegation was almost impossible to reconcile with the man they remembered. He had no significant criminal record, held a steady job, worked in a Michigan prison as a dental hygienist, played music, married, and appeared to be a respectable member of the community. That ordinary public life is one of the case's most disturbing lessons. A person can conceal terrible violence behind years of routine, friendship, employment, and family life. When Joyce finally received confirmation, the answer brought mixed emotions. She knew who had assaulted her daughter, and she knew he could never hurt anyone again. But identification could not restore Sherry's life. It could not give her marriage, children, birthdays, or the decades her family should have shared with her. Joyce also wished her husband Robert had lived to hear the result. He had died in 2025 after spending years under suspicion, never receiving the public certainty that the DNA eventually provided. The identification also created new questions. Investigators have considered whether Collins could be connected to other unsolved disappearances, including 2 girls who vanished in 1969 after reportedly entering a white van. Collins's band was said to have been in that region around the same period, making him a person of interest, but no bodies or decisive forensic evidence have been found. Police have not established his responsibility in those cases, and they continue to seek reliable information. Some details of Sherry's final days may never be known. Investigators cannot ask Collins how he encountered her, how he forced such a cautious teenager into a vehicle, whether he acted alone, or what happened before she was left in the ditch. His suicide closed the possibility of a confession and denied the family the chance to confront him in court. The DNA delivered identity, but not every answer and not the accountability of a conviction. Still, the case demonstrates why preserved evidence and